Hello, I'm Jean Harvey. This presentation is built from a webcast prepared for the American Society for Quality in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It deals with business process outsourcing, particularly the recent challenges that have emerged in that field, and try to present a clear, actual picture of what goes on right now. And it tries to modelize it as well to help organizations who have decisions to make, whether they're already involved in it or they're considering getting into it. There's advice built in all along the presentation. My topics then: first, short background, a short introduction to process management. I'll explore the process and sourcing space, present the benefits and risks, and conclude on the state of VPO and a wish list. Henry Ford, 1910, was maybe the prototype of the fully integrated enterprise. At that time, there wasn't all that many alternatives, really, than to do everything yourself if you wanted it done well. So the Ford factory was integrated up to the rubber plantation, really. And the year after, he started assembling cars in the UK to reduce transportation cost. That was probably not the beginning of outsourcing, because you could probably trace it back in history. But from then on, a number of changes have brought us to the environment that we know today. Firstly, we separate information nowadays from the things. So we can manage the information from far away, and we can apply knowledge to the information from far away. Add to that we can send the information very far away instantaneously, and you get an idea of the possibilities that exist because of the low cost of telecom nowadays. Because we know processes much better today, we can standardize processes to the point of making them a commodity that can be transacted almost like other commodities. Developing countries have developed. The workforce has changed. Governments have understood that through education and investments in infrastructure, everybody stands to gain. Apply this with the other forces, and you've got opportunity. Our infrastructure is going down, largely, at least in North America. We're not investing a lot, as you know. We're in deficit situations and all. And I don't think Europe is in much better shape. Developing economies are getting money, and they are investing in their infrastructure. So the infrastructure gap is narrowing. The new economy has applied the theory, as we know it, that you should concentrate on what you do well and let others do things that you don't do well, that they make their objective their business. They didn't have any choice. Competition was so hot. They had to work fast to remain nimble, and they've applied the lessons of that theory very well, and the old economy has learned. Of course, dealing with a plethora of old systems that are built in the organization, there is much more of a challenge in trying to be nimble. And we know a lot more about value creation today than we did then. Put all this together, and you've got the potential for BPO. The P there stands for processes. What are they exactly? A process is a shared and controlled way of doing things, involving a chain of commitments distributed logically in and out of the organization, that operates a value-added transformation on inputs to meet customers' requirements. An organization works as a set of interconnected processes. In well-managed organizations, these processes are structured according to a planned architecture. I will discuss a little bit, I guess call this a short process refresher. This is the APQC process model. It's available freely on the web. It is used as a basis for benchmarking by APQC. Those would be the generic core processes, from developing vision, developing, managing products, market and sell, deliver products, manage customer service. Those processes are the ones that create value. And they are supported by cross-functional processes such as develop and manage human capital, financial resources, environment, external relationship, and so on. As you see by the orientation here, those are cross-functional processes. Any of those processes can be exploded into a number of sub-processes at the level 2, 3, and 4. Customer service, for example, if you take it here, this again from APQC, if you take at level 2, how do you manage customer service? Well, you have to plan and manage customer service operations. How? Well, for example, you have to manage customer service requests and inquiries. How? Receive the request, route the customer request, and respond to the customer request. This is generic. It would apply broadly to any organization, but not very well if you're in a specific atypical industry such as banking. Look at banking, and again I'm at APQC, their banking process model. This is delivering services to customer. That's an operating process. Collect credit information, prepare documents and close, review and extend credit. Viewing the organization this way and managing it this way is a prerequisite for what we call process management, which itself is a prerequisite for responsible outsourcing. Being able to understand what your processes are, to separate one from another, to tell where one stops and where the other begins, is fundamental. Strategy, represented here by the chessboard, is a dynamic game. They move, we move, and then we change the process. They move again, we move again, and then we got to change the process. Strategy is not a plan. It's coherence in action under an umbrella orientation. This umbrella changes shape, of course, as we plan, as we make moves based on what we expect competitors to do. We realize very often that they don't, and they surprise us, and then we got to change our move. Not only decide to change our move, but decide where exactly do we have to act. At level 1, if we take core processes here, you would measure that process and find out through metrics, analytics, what's the process that you got to change to apply your strategy. Then you would break it down at level 2, and you would again measure at a level 2. And if you decide that this process is critical and that you are very bad at doing it, then you might consider outsourcing it, taking it out of the related processes and asking someone else to do it. But unless you're able to understand, characterize in detail this process, unless you understand the internal dynamics of that process, if you outsource, you essentially abdicate. You are saying, I give up, you do it. Then you're becoming totally dependent on an outside provider. And while, first, it's a big risk. Second, even if it works in the short term, you are certainly creating very important long-term liabilities. What I'm talking about is process management maturity. If your processes look like this and you outsource, you become totally vulnerable. You have a job to do before you can outsource. Divided into 4 steps, First, start managing the process, defining it, input, output, subparts, black boxes, some metrics here and there. Then define it, zoom into the black boxes, refine your metrics to be quick feedback, and then start using the quick feedback in the feedback and control loop. So your management becomes faster. You become rapidly aware of process shift and process drift, notions that I will address in a forthcoming video. And once you're at that point, of course, you need to build a social dynamic in your organization where you can actually isolate parts of the process and change them. Again, in a forthcoming video, I'll address the social, technical, and strategic challenges that this poses to the organization. This is based on the CMMI from Carnegie Mellon. It is a model, but I'm really using it here to illustrate process maturity in general. In parallel with that, a related issue is how well do you manage your information? What is your information, your enterprise architecture maturity? At a basic level, you have business silos. Companies look to maximize individual business unit needs, nothing else. You need this, we build this for you. Over time, of course, you end up with a mess of things that are totally unrelated and data that is incompatible. Then you move on, as most companies have, I would say today, to standardize technology. Whenever a need arises, of course, you start looking at similar needs and what exists exactly and what can we do together to minimize double use and incompatibility. And at some point you make the jump to optimize core, where an ERP will give the enterprise a common base to operate. Of course, you limit the ability for an immediate answer, an immediate and specific answer to a specific unit's need. As you mature further, you can re-establish this through the last phase, which is business modularity, whereby you can essentially develop modules that will be reused. Those modules are developed for specific needs, but they will be reusable for other units with some minor adaptation, still based on the optimized core. Wherever you sit with respect to this will dictate what you can and cannot do in outsourcing and the risk you face when you're doing it. The degree of maturity of your organization in process management is a critical determinant of your outsourcing capability and risks. Two otherwise comparable organizations with different levels of maturity, outsourcing the same process at the same time, will face very different risks. The idea that the simple fact that you outsource a process will suddenly solve your problem is jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Let's, with this introduction of process management, I think we are in a position now to look at the process space and the sourcing space. In the process space, I will look at the major dimensions of processes, the major categories of processes and their features. And I will try to match this with a map of the sourcing possibilities as well, looking at distance. There's various types of distance as well. So let's start with the categories of processes. So let's move on to the important dimensions of processes to classify them. Strategic impact versus non-strategic process. To know that clearly, we need a clear strategy, an explicit strategy that is known by everyone discussing the decision to outsource or not. Degree of customer contact is fundamental in all organizations, in complex services even more. When you're in contact, whether it be on the phone, face to face, there are perceptions. It's a high bandwidth. Even if it's copper wire, it's high bandwidth. Much information goes through, it impacts perceptions and emotions. Some processes involve no customer contact, but much employee contact. And this is important as well, as employee perceptions matter. They certainly matter to customers anyway. So, contact, critical dimension to understand. Interaction intensity of the process. How often do you have to interact? How often are there interactions between the process and the organization? And are those interactions limited and pointed, or are they broad-based going from here to there? Are they involved, complex, or are they simple? Are people working in parallel, sequentially, or are the two processes, or is this process coupled with other processes in the organization, meaning many back and forth in the organization? The more complex knowledge is very often tacit or implicit. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book Blink, good read, by the way, interesting read, couple of hours, but very stimulating. He describes the case of a tennis coach that can always predict double faults before they happen. He predicts it before the ball leaves the racket, all the time. Not most of the time, all the time. And he can't tell you why. He can't tell how he's doing it. Certainly, he can't teach you how to do it. This kind of knowledge, tacit knowledge, if it's outsourced, makes you certainly very dependent on specific organizations and even specific persons. Something you want to consider closely before doing it. Degree or potential for standardization, which is largely a function of the variables that we discussed. And the degree of interdependence of the process with other processes in the organization. Many of these dimensions are interrelated, so I will focus on two of them. Customer contact, knowledge embeddedness. And let's make this a 2x2 matrix. High knowledge embeddedness, low. High customer contact, low. We tend to call this, even though it's not a 0-1 thing, as a knowledge process outsourcing. Whenever there's low knowledge embeddedness, business process out. But again, there is a wide gray area here. Some are clearly up, some are clearly down, but there's a lot of in between. So those are continuum, despite the generalization that I will do here. Let's start with this corner here. It's low customer contact, maybe high employee contact, but it's low customer contact, so there is not that immediate market vulnerability. And it's low knowledge. For example, you process invoices. A lot of the accounting tasks are of that nature as well. A lot of maintenance of employee information is of that nature as well. Lots of transaction to be processed with the knowledge being explicit. Thus standardizable, teachable, relatively easy to verify as well. That's one type of process. Front office, still low embeddedness. So if you look, for example, at hotel reservations, train reservations, those are fairly straightforward, but there is customer contact. The perception aspect of quality of service comes in. The Association of British Rail Operators have outsourced the information to British Telecom and to Ventura, and I think it's Business Logic, the Indian firm. British Rail, for example, focus on managing trains. This is what they do well. Let British Telecom and the Indian outsourcer manage answering customer, which presumably they do well. By the way, it's interesting to note that Ventura is based in India but as not outshored, but onshored. It's got an office, it's got some offices as well in the UK in order to smooth the transition between their Indian organization and British organizations. Let's recall as well that quality of service involves reliability, deliver the results. Assurance, the feeling on the part of the customer that he is in competent hands. Empathy, the feeling as a customer that my service provider understands what I'm going through. Responsiveness, are they trying to help me here when I express a need? And courtesy, of course, including basic respect. Those elements, the perception, and the perception here is reality for business purposes. Those elements are at stake when you're doing this. So let me go back to the third element here. Here you're still in eye contact and a lot of knowledge, like front office solutions. Customer technical support in complex systems, meaning that the customer doesn't know really well, and there are emotions involved as well in it, stress, pressure. He goes to someone with a higher level of knowledge, presumably a service provider. There is the gap of knowledge intervening here. This is a complex and dicey situation where you want to manage distance. You want to think twice about making the distance too big. Back office solutions are still a lot of knowledge, but no or low customer contact. Analyzing X-ray or CT scans, for example, when it's nighttime in North America, doing that in India. Classifying molecules, there's PhDs in molecular biology, classifying molecules by night. This is very high competence. A lot of this knowledge is implicit in that the person doing it has the knowledge in between the ears, and you have to trust that person. Not to say that you cannot do this, but again, you got to consider and weigh carefully the pros and cons in the distance. Basically, interaction intensity and interaction complexity here, and interaction dispersion. If there are a lot of transactions, they are complex technically, emotionally, and they touch many points in the organization, not just what we call the SPOC, the single point of contact. Those two variables multiply each other to determine complexity. The more transactions you have, the more complex they have technically, emotionally, the more different points they touch in the organization. Just the SPOC, just the one person or many person at many different times, predictable or not, is a key factor in determining the distance you're willing to put that process. And of course that as well involves considering employee contacts and your ability to control that process from a distance. And that's based on your capability. How capable are you? So let's look at the distance now and move slowly towards the sourcing space.